What's going on, family? I'm Scrapbook Boxing. The Museum of the Forgotten Fisticuff series will continue its conversation with you concerning the complete history of boxing. On January 6, 1928, Philadelphia's light heavyweight Tommy Loughlin is dropped twice in the first round by Leo Lomsky, only to get back up to defeat him and retain his World Light Heavyweight Championship crown in 15 rounds. The contest took place in New York's Madison Square Garden. The referee was Dave Miller. Now, Leo Lomsky was originally from Oklahoma. He would move to Washington, while 2 years after breaking his hand more than 13 times, he would soon retire. Tommy Loughlin, who was he? His name was Thomas Patrick. He was born November 29, 1902 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. He would die July 7, 1982, just 79 years of age at the time of his death, and he would reside in Philadelphia. He stood 5 foot 11 and a half inches. He was a light heavyweight champion. He had a record of 95 wins, 24 losses, 45 no-decision contests with 1 no contest. He was in the Boxing Hall of Fame in 1956, the International Boxing Hall of Fame in 1991. He was in the ring with fighters such as Mickey Walker, Harry Greb, Young Stribling, and Johnny Wilson, Jimmy Braddock, Jimmy Slattery, Mike McTeague, and Leo Lomsky, Roland Todd, George Compartier, Jeff Smith, and Steve Hamish, as well as Gerald Tuffy Griffith and Al McCoy. That's a mouthful. Now, Leo Lomsky, who was he? His name was Leo Joseph Lomsky. He was known as the Aberdeen Assassin, born October 27, 1903 in Oklahoma. He died November 12, 1975. He was 72 years of age at the time of his death. He stood 5 foot 10 inches, light heavyweight, had a 71-inch reach, fought from 1922 to 1938, had a total bout career of 146 bouts, 103 wins, 27 losses, and 40 knockouts. He was in the ring with fighters such as Maxie Rosenblum, Charlie Ballinger, Tuffy Griffith, and Mickey Walker, Lee Ramage, and Kingfish Slavinsky, Armand Emanuel, Jim Braddock, Pete Lasso, Mike McTeague, Howard Mays, Ted Moore, Eddie Roberts, as well as Tiger Flowers. He had an outstanding career, and as you can see, his resume is beyond average. January 13, 1928, heavyweight New Zealand's Tommy Heeney had 46 bouts when he drew 12 rounds in New York's Madison Square Garden with the Boston Gob, 6-foot Jack Sharkey with 35 bouts. That was some contest because the Boston Gob was on a roll, and he was highly looked at as the next conqueror of the heavyweight championship division. February 10, 1928, World Featherweight Champion Tony Canzanari defeats Philadelphia Benny Bass. He defeated him for the undisputed featherweight championship crown, and that was some contest. Now, to go back a moment, Benny Bass and Red Chapman would square off September 12, 1927 for the vacant featherweight championship title. Now, who was Benny Bass? His name was Benjamin Bachu. He was born December 4th, 1903 in Ukraine. He would die June 25th, 1975. He was 71 years of age at the time of his death, and he would reside in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. He stood 5 foot 1 and a half inches, had a 64-inch reach, and he was known as the Little Fish. He fought from 1920. Great fighter, really good fighter during his day. He had a total bout career of 195 bouts, 158 wins, 29 losses, and 72 knockouts. He was in the ring with fighters such as Eddie Cool, Mike Ballerino, Eddie O'Keefe, Babe Herman, Davey Abad, Todd Moran, Red Chapman, Joe Click, Eddie Shea, Tony Falco, Charles Bud Taylor, Kid Chocolate, Johnny Jaddick, Frankie Gennaro. I mean, great fighters, great fighters Benny Bass was in the ring with. But what really got everybody understanding how great of a fighter Kid Chocolate was when he was in the ring with Benny Bass. Benny Bass was a really aggressive fighter from Ukraine. He could punch with either hand. They called him Little Fish, but he was just an underrated fighter. I don't hear much about him in today's conversation, but an outstanding fighter. If you look at Hardline Boxing Channel, he talks a lot about these fighters. Wesley Ramsey was another good fighter. Fought on March 9th, 1932. He fought Sammy Fuller, February 7th, 1930. Petey Cerrone, August 27, 1934. Fought him twice. Johnny Farr as well. So Benny Bass was an outstanding fighter. February 24th, 1928, babyface assassin Jimmy McLane knocks out Jewish star Sid Terrace in 1 round in New York's Madison Square Garden. Now, Sid Terrace, the Wizard of Ringcraft, was born September 26, 1904 on the Lower East Side of New York. He died December 1974 in Miami, Florida. Sid Terrace had knocked out Ruby Goldstein at the Polo Grounds in the first round. I'll tell you the story that was told to me by my friend Teddy. He was a Jewish man, 80 years old at that time of conversation. He knew exactly who all those fighters were because they lived in his neighborhood. And it was a conversation that you heard in the barbershops, all in the fish markets about this fight coming up. This was more than a world championship fight within the community because you didn't have to be a titleist in order to be considered a champion in your community. You were a champion because of what you represented during that time. Now, these men, or I should say boys really, sat next to each other in classrooms. They were just the average guy. They would go to the barbershops, and they were the hero in the community, and everyone around the world knew their names. So fighters such as Benny Leonard and Sid Terrace and Ruby Goldstein and Benny Volger, all of those guys were really respected during their time. Now, Sid Terrace stood 5'8". He was a lightweight, had a 70-inch reach. He had 50 straight victories as an amateur. He won a New York State Metropolitan, National, and International Championships within 10 days, ranking from February 1925 to November 1929, 1922, 1931. He had 105 total bouts, 88 wins, 13 losses, and 12 knockouts. 5-year reign. He was in the ring with fighters such as Jimmy McLane and James Archibald McLane. Jimmy McLane was born December 19, 1907 in Hills Branch County. He died October 28, 2004 in Richmond, Washington. He stood 5'6". He was a welterweight and fought from 121 to 147.5 pounds. I'm trying to remember this at the top of my head, so please excuse me. He was managed by Charles Pop Foster, and he fought fighters such as Fidel Barber, Billy Patrol, Sammy Mandel, Barney Ross, Young Corbett III, Jackie Fields, Young Jack Thompson, Ruby Goldstein, Sammy Baker, Ray Miller, Benny Leonard, Al Singer. He was in there with so many great fighters. And the thing about Jimmy McLaren's career, he didn't have a long career, but he packed his career with all Hall of Famers, great fighters during his day. And you got to give hats off to Jimmy McLane. I had the pleasure of meeting him more than one occasion. He told me stories about the Jimmy McLane and Benny Leonard fight. And he told me that Benny Leonard really punched hard. The issue was his timing was off because Benny Leonard had quit boxing in 1925. He came back because of the stock market in 29. He lost about $500,000. He made a comeback. In 1932, he would fight Jimmy McLane. And after 19 straight victories as a comeback, and he would be stopped in 6 rounds. He had Jimmy McLane going for a short bit, but he just couldn't keep up with Jimmy McLane. Too fast with his feet, too fast with his hands, with the in and out movement. And he would get tagged, and Jimmy McLane would take him out. So Jimmy McLane, great fighter. Sid Terrace, great fighter. Benny Bass's great fighter. Now, Thursday night, March 1st, 1928. 29-year-old Tom Heeney defeats 27-year-old Jack Delaney in 15 rounds in New York's Madison Square Garden. Tommy Heeney stood 5'10.5". He was a heavyweight with a 72-inch reach, had a record of 31 wins, 8 losses, 5 draws, and 15 knockouts. As for Jack Delaney, he stood 5'11", was a light heavyweight, had a 73.5-inch reach. He had a record of 71 wins, 9 losses, 2 draws, and 39 knockouts. Now, Tom would defeat Jack in 15 rounds in front of an audience of 19,000 screaming fans in New York's Madison Square Garden. Together, they had grossed $174,000. During that time, that was impressive. It was a heavyweight tournament and has been credited for the vacant heavyweight championship title position of Gene Tunney's retirement. Tom Heeney, he was known as the Hard Rock from Down Under. He was born May 18, 1898, in Gisborne, New Zealand. He died June 15, 1984. And he stood 5'10.5". He was a heavyweight with a 72-inch reach. Fought from 1920 to 1933. Had a total bout career of 68 bouts, 37 wins, 15 knockouts, 22 losses. And he was in a ring with fighters such as Victorian Combolo and Charlie Ratliff, Max Baer, Tuffy Griffiths, Jimmy Slattery, Phil Scott, just to name a few. Tommy Heeney was known as the Rock from Down Under. March 12, 1928, 25-year-old Johnny Risco, who was known as the Cleveland Baker Boy, would defeat 25-year-old Jack Sharkey, who was known as the Boston Garb, in 15 rounds in New York's Madison Square Garden. The referee was Billy Kid McPartlin, and he had it 9-4 for Risco. Risco stood 5'11". He was a heavyweight and had a 74-inch reach. Jack Sharkey was 6 foot as heavyweight and he had a 76-inch reach. Risco was 44 wins, 20 losses, 7 draws, and 15 knockouts. Jack Sharkey had a record of 27 wins, 7 losses, 1 draw, and 8 knockouts. He had 10,943 spectators in New York for that fight. They grossed a combination of $100,091. And they were hard-working dollars. During that time, you have to understand, there was somewhat of a depression, and no one really had the kind of money to see these kind of fights, but fighting was what it was during that time. You had OTB a little later on, but you had boxing and baseball. But boxing is something that everybody could afford. It was easy access because they can go to see the fights after work. And that was just what everybody did. Boxing was the sport during that time. Jack Sharkey believes that he was low-blowed, and Risco caused him to be distracted by fighting, and of course he complained, and Risco believed he was ready for the pickings. And, when you look at these kind of fights and these fighters during that time, you have to realize what boxing was. How was it looked at? What was the underground for the mobs? What was the scene like during that time? And when you put it all together with your thoughts and realize the reality of it is a lot of these guys might have either thrown fights or they had to fight in order to win for the next fight. They didn't have food on the table, even though they worked a 9-to-5 job. So boxing was everything for a lot of these fighters, and they put everything they had into the game. Now, on a Wednesday night, April 4th, 1928, 22-year-old Max Schmeling, who was known as the Black Ulan, he defeated 26-year-old Franz Denier in 15 rounds to win the German heavyweight championship title in Berlin. The referee was Paul Sampson, and he gave the nod to the Black Ulan, Max Schmeling. Schmeling was 6 foot 1 inch. He was a heavyweight with a 76-inch reach. He had a record of 36 total bouts, 4 losses, 3 draws, and 26 knockouts. Franz Denier, he was 6 foot, had a record of 18 wins, 5 losses, 3 draws, and 10 knockouts. Now, who was Max Schmeling? His name was the Black Ulan. That's what they called him. He was born September 28, 1905 in Kleins, Luckman, Germany. He died February 2nd, 2005. He was 99 years of age at the time of his death, and he would reside in Brandenburg, Germany. I met Max Schmeling once. He fought from 1924 to 1948. He had a total bout career of 70 bouts, 56 wins, 10 losses, and 39 knockouts. Now, he was stopped by Gypsy Daniels, but then he would return the favor by knocking out Gypsy Daniels himself. Gypsy Daniels stopped him in 1 round. He was in the ring with Johnny Risco, who was known as the Cleveland Baker Boy. Steve Hamas used to step on his feet. That's what he did a lot in his career. He was from New Jersey. He also fought Jack Sharkey and Max Baer, Joe Louis, Phil Scott, Primo Carnera, Pierre Charles, and who else did he fight? I can't remember who else. He fought so many other fighters, but the thing mostly got the attention from the crowd with Max Schmeling is that Max Schmeling knocked out Joe Louis in 1936. But he also stated he was hit with a low blow in 1930 when he was in a ring with Jack Sharkey. They were fighting for the vacant crown of Gene Tunney, the America's heavyweight championship title. So what would wind up happening is Jack Sharkey would defeat Tommy Loughran for the America's heavyweight championship crown, and Max Schmeling would defeat Franz Denier for the Germany heavyweight championship crown. And both men would meet each other and they would unify basically the title and become a world champion. So Max Schmeling would win that title because of a low blow that was alleged thrown by Jack Sharkey. But in 1932, Jack Sharkey would straighten that out and he would defeat Max Schmeling. Now, one of the belts was stripped from Max Schmeling because Schmeling didn't give Jack Sharkey a return go right away. He wound up facing Lawrence Young Stribling. He would get rid of him at the end of the last round and, he would knock him out, but they would strip him. So he would wind up fighting Jack Sharkey in 32, and Jack Sharkey would defeat him and he would become the world heavyweight champion. Monday night, April 30th, 1928. 25-year-old Jack Sharkey knocks out former world light heavyweight champion Jack Delaney, who was 28 years old, in one round in New York's Madison Square Garden. Referee was Lou Magnolia. He stopped the contest 1 minute and 13 seconds of the first round in front of 15,000 hardworking spectators. Sharkey was a 3-1 favorite, and he won the decision. Now, Sharkey was 6 foot. He was a heavyweight and had a 76-inch reach. Delaney was 5'11", light heavyweight, and had a 73.5-inch reach. Jack Sharkey had a record of 27 wins, 8 losses, 1 draw, and 8 knockouts. Jack Sharkey had a record of 71 wins, 10 losses, 2 draws, and 39 knockouts. He was in the ring with Jack Sharkey. Very powerful man, very powerful man. Now, let me tell you something about the men that he was in the ring with. Jack Sharkey fought Jack Delaney, Max Schmeling, Jack Dempsey, Joe Louis, Primo Carnera, Tommy Loughran, Mike Mateague. Fascinating fighter he was. He had a record of 38 wins, 13 losses. He was 91 years of age at the time of his death. He would die Wednesday at Beverly Hospital on a respirator. And he pretty much lived out the rest of his life in somewhat pain, if you will. But he was a referee for Archie Moore and Yvonne Durrell in Canada for both fights in 1958. Great fighter was Jack Sharkey. He spoke highly of Joe Louis, which I respect. And he was just a guy that wanted a shot. He lived in Boston. A pretty good fighter was the Boston Garb, Jack Sharkey. Now, one footnote on that fight with Jack Sharkey and Jack Delaney. The next day after the fight, the chairman of New York State Athletic Commission had warned both Sharkey and Delaney that a full investigation would be taking place after receiving rumors that there was a possible fixed fight. And if he found out that there was a fixed fight, both men would not receive a purse. February 18, 1927, Delaney was matched against Jim Maloney as a heavyweight tournament with the winner to meet with Gene Tunney. Now, Jim Maloney would be another fighter who would claim foul with Jack Sharkey. And it seemed like this was happening a lot. And Jack Sharkey would be disqualified. It was really amazing. But he wound up getting the opportunity to fight for Gene Tunney's claimant, title with Tommy Loughran. So that was amazing. But Jack Sharkey also met with Jim Maloney. Like I said, he met with him. Jack Dempsey after defeating Jack Delaney. So you gotta say to yourself that Jack Sharkey did get a lot of opportunities because he did, but he did get some bad breaks as well. May 24th, 1928, 25-year-old Todd Morgan defends his World Junior Lightweight Championship crown against 25-year-old Cannonball Eddie Martin. 15 rounds in New York's Madison Square Garden. He would take an unnecessary beating in front of 6,000 screaming spectators. The Associated Press felt that this contest should be stopped. He had Morgan up ahead 7 rounds. And the closing behind the second round even. So it was no reason for that fight to continue because he was totally being outmatched. A rematch took place July 18, 1928 in Brooklyn, Ebbets Field in New York, 15-round draw. 20,000 spectators were satisfied for this particular bout. It was postponed 5 times, but they finally decided to get it going on. The weather was a huge factor in that fight and fights that would be canceled. So it was really amazing. Morgan would get a huge gash that was swollen underneath his eye, and it was just a brutal thing that happened with him. Now, Morgan stood 5 foot 7.5 inches. He was a junior lightweight, had a 71-inch reach. Martin stood 5 foot 3 inches. He was a junior lightweight with a 65-inch reach. Martin had a record of 67 wins, 12 losses, 19 draws with 7 knockouts. And Martin had a record of 75 wins, 6 losses, 2 draws, and 75 knockouts. February 15, 1929, Todd Morgan adopted 4-year-old Billy's son. And that was his pride and joy. Now, on a Friday night, June 1st, 1928, 25-year-old Philly Phantom defends his world light heavyweight crown against former New York SAC world welterweight champion, 25-year-old Pete Lasso in 15 rounds. The contest took place at the Brooklyn, New York Ebbets Field, and the referee was Jed Gaspin. Now, the Philly Phantom, as we know, is Tommy Loughran. Loughlin stood 5'11.5". He was a light heavyweight and had a 73-inch reach. He had a record of 82 wins, 14 losses, 8 draws, and 12 knockouts. Pete Lasso stood 5'7.5". He was a middleweight with a 68-inch reach, and he had a record of 88 wins, 22 losses, 4 draws, and 24 knockouts. Associated Press had 5 rounds to Tommy Loughlin, 4 rounds to Lasso, and 1 round even. Now, Pete Lasso, who was he? His name was Young Clancy. He was born August 1st, 1902, in Coleman, Pennsylvania. He died July 7th, 1968. He was 65 years of age at the time of his death, and he would reside in Atlantic City, New Jersey. He stood 5'7.5". He was a welterweight with a 68-inch reach, had a record of 146 total bouts, 93 wins, 25 knockouts, 39 losses, 12 draws, and 2 no contests. He was in a ring with Mickey Walker. June 3rd, 1927. Great fighter. Great fighter. June 15th, 1928. World Light Heavyweight Champion, Philly Phantom, Tommy Loughlin, defeats Roland Todd in London, England. December 10th, 1923. 10 rounds, New York's Madison Square Garden. Now, August 22nd, 1957. Six Stadium in Seattle, Washington. Tommy Loughlin, referee Pete Rademacher. 1956, his professional debut was against the gold medalist in 1952 games as a world middleweight champion. He would fight the world heavyweight champion Floyd Patterson in his professional debut. That is fascinating. Floyd Patterson was the middleweight gold medal champion in 1952 Helsinki Games. He became the youngest heavyweight champion at the age of 21, and he would win the title from Ingemar Johansson. He would win the title from Archie Moore in 1956 when Rocky Marciano would relinquish his title in 56. Rocky Marciano's last heavyweight championship contest was against Archie Moore in 1955. 1956 was a very good year, but that's the year that Floyd Patterson would become the heavyweight champion of the world. I want to get my story straight here. Now, Floyd Patterson picked up, I wouldn't say picked up, but he wound up adopting 2 sons. And Tracy Patterson, it was the Harrison brothers. Tracy Harris Patterson would wind up becoming a very good fighter. I knew him as well. They lived in New Paltz. And he also had a brother, but Tracy was the fighter. And Tracy Patterson would wind up being dropped himself when he was in there with a Turo Gotti. Turo Gotti was a very good boxer early on in his career. But Floyd Patterson at that time was the New York State Boxing Athletic Commissioner. So that was some time. I met Floyd Patterson many, many times. Met him at various dinners. I used to see him at the gyms all the time. But Floyd Patterson was a very good fighter. And he was a devoted father to Tracy Harris Patterson. R.I.P. to him. Now, Thursday night, June 21st, 1928. 26-year-old Tory Bulldog Irish Mickey Walker defends his World Middleweight Championship crown over 22-year-old Nebraskan Wildcat, California's Ace Hutkins in Chicago, Illinois. They fought at the Comiskey Park, and the referee was Eddie Purdy. He voted for Hutkins, and the judge Ed Klein and Harry Carroll voted for Mickey Walker. June 5th, 1928, Walker defends his title against Jack Malone. Walker was 5'7.5". 5'7" inches, I believe he really was. He was the same height as Noah Brusso, who was Tommy Burns, as well as Sam Langford. Now, Sam Langford was more 5 foot, I would say 6 3/4 inches than 5'7". But just imagine that. They were both short men. And Mickey Walker moved up from the welterweight as high as the heavyweight division. He was a middleweight champion. He stood he had a 67-inch reach. Stood 5'7" inches. Had a record of 87 wins, 15 losses, 2 draws, and 36 knockouts. Ace Hutkins, the Nebraskan Wildcat, stood 5'8.5" inches. He was a welterweight and had a 68-inch reach. He had a record of 59 wins, 13 losses, 13 draws, and 21 knockouts. Now, Jack Malone, his name was James Michael Malone. He was born, July 25th, 1896 in Minneapolis, and he died July 4th, 1964. He was 67 years of age at the time of his death, and he would reside in St. Petersburg, Florida. He stood 5'8". He was a middleweight, fought from 1916 to 1931. He had a record of 130 total bouts, 91 wins, 24 losses, and 33 knockouts. I want to make one correction. Jack Maloney, he died in St. Paul, Minnesota. That's where the Gibbons brothers were born. Michael Dowd was born. Billy Misk was born. St. Paul, Minnesota. I don't know why I said St. Petersburg, Florida. But he was born. He had died in St. Paul, Minnesota. Just want to make that correction. He was born in Minneapolis as well. Monday night, May 21st, 1928, world lightweight champion Sammy Mandel defends his crown over Jimmy McLane in the 15 rounds of New York's Polo Grounds. The referee was Lou Magnolia. He would win a unanimous decision. It was a great undercard featuring King Tut defeating Sid Barbarian and knocking him out in 3 rounds. Johnny Jadek defeating Al Foreman. Johnny Jadek would become a junior welterweight champion. Baby Joe Gans defeating Manuel Quintori. Very good, very, very, very good undercard. It was 20,200 yelling spectators in that audience. Even the nosebleed seats was, quite expensive for that particular bout. They combined 137,467 gross receipts. It was a 7-1 odds against Sammy Mandel, 3-1 on a KO. Mandel weighed 135 pounds, and McLane weighed 135 pounds as well. Now, July 26, 1928, world heavyweight champion Gene Tunney defeats Tom Heeney of New Zealand in 11 rounds. Bronx, New York's Yankee Stadium, in defense of his what would be Tunney's last world heavyweight championship title defense that he would win from Jack Dempsey in 1926. The promoter was Tex Rickard, the referee was Eddie Forbes, and the judge was Tom Flynn. The other judge was Charles F. Mafflin. Now, Gene Tunney earned $525,000. Tom Heeney earned $100,000. That is a lot of money during that time. I don't, when you start looking at these numbers and you say to yourself, there are fighters out there that didn't get the opportunity to have these type of numbers to get certain amount of money to feed their family. And you're bringing fighters like Tom Heeney over from New Zealand to get a shot at an American, really, World Heavyweight Championship title because Gene Tunney's title was from Jack Dempsey. Jack Dempsey represented, America, so to speak. And he never really traveled outside of his country or, peninsula. But Jack Dempsey stated that this was the America's Heavyweight Championship title, although it was a World Championship title. Gene Tunney was a 3-1 favorite. And I think it was $20,000 radio rights, which was absurd during that time. January 17th, 1930, London's lightweight star, 20-year-old Jackie Kid Bird, Judah Bergen. His name was the Whitechapel Whirlwind. He defeats 21-year-old Tony Canzanari in a heated 10-round battle in New York's Madison Square Garden for the NBA Lightweight Championship strap. Now, the Junior Welterweight Championship strap was online as well, the NBA version of it. The referee was Mike Heides. Canzanari stood 5'4". He was a junior welterweight, had a 65-inch reach. He had a record of 66 wins, 6 losses, 8 draws, and 20 knockouts. Jackie Kid Bird stood 5'9". He was a junior welterweight, had a record of 74 wins, 4 losses, 5 draws, and 29 knockouts. Between July 9th, 1929 and October 30th, 1929, Canzanari faced Phil McGraw. He defeated him. Johnny Farr defeated him, and Sammy Mandel, who he would lose to. Jackie Kid Bird, he faced Phil McGraw, defeated him. Bruce Flowers defeated him between September 30th, 1929 and October 10th, 1929. So that's it for me for this video. I'm Scrapbook Boxing, Museum of the Forgotten Fisticuff series. All great fights and all great fighters will never be forgotten on my channel. Once again, and I just got to put it out there, if I stumble a little bit, I'm talking at the top of my head. I'm not reading anything. Understand that. So when I start getting comments, all these corrections, yes, thank you. But you try it. I'm speaking all of this. This entire series has been from the top of the head. I've never looked at anything. That's just my style. So please keep in mind and be sensitive. I'm Scrapbook Boxing once again, Museum of the Forgotten Fisticuff series. Thank you for all your viewership. Continue to listen, watch my series. And I'm believe it or not, I'm 3/4 away from the project that I'm working on. It's going to be exciting. I can't wait for that moment. I still have a long way to go. I'm going back to Florida to finish up because I didn't really even get a chance to do the project that I went down there for after I had an episode. So I got to go back down there. I'm going to meet the head of the international boxing record, a couple of gentlemen that is a part of that organization. And I got to get some things, make sure things are straightened out as far as my records are concerned. I don't want them all over the place because when you look at records, sometimes you get 4 or 5 different dates. You get 4 or 5 different wins or different losses. And I just want to get all that mess straightened out. I don't need anybody fact checking me after the book is done. And, I don't need all that. So that's what I'm working on. So thanks for listening. And I'll see you in the next video. Peace.